This happened when I was in 8th grade. The school's lockdown alarm blared through the halls, shattering the usual calm of a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the hallway with my friends, Jessica and Sarah, when the PA system crackled to life. All students and staff, proceed to the nearest classroom and lock all doors. This is not a drill. Panic set in as we realized we were nowhere near our classroom. Desperate for safety, we decided to head for the basement. The basement door creaked open, revealing a dark, cold space. The only light that was down there was a dim, flickering red glow that barely illuminated the area, casting scary shadows on the walls. As we descended the stairs into the basement, a chill ran down my spine. The basement felt unsettling with the weak red light, but we kept going. We had to find somewhere safe. We found a corner at the bottom of the basement and huddled together. Given the situation, we were all scared, but we were trying to stay calm. The oppressive darkness and faint red light made everything seem sinister. As we sat there in the corner of the basement, we noticed something that made our blood run cold. In the far corner of the basement, opposite of us, a group of people was sitting together. They seemed strangely calm, almost too calm for a situation like this. We didn't recognize them. They were barely visible in the dim light, their bodies almost merging with the shadows and darkness. The only detail I could make out was that one of them had long, curly hair, almost as if it was an old woman. They didn't move or make a sound, and we didn't see them when we entered the basement, which only made it all the more scarier. I looked over at Jessica and Sarah and saw that they had noticed them too. None of us dared to say anything. We tried to ignore them, but their presence was unnerving. The group spoke in low, murmured tones, so we were unable to make out what they were saying. The more we tried to ignore them, the more we felt their eyes on us. Every now and then, one of them would glance our way. Their eyes were reflecting in the dim red light. I wanted to believe it was just other students that got the same idea as us, but in the back of my head, I felt that wasn't the case. They kept looking at us, one at a time, and it was starting to creep us out. Jessica even began to cry a little, so I tried to calm her down. But as I did, I noticed that the figures began to move. They started slowly crawling towards us in a disturbing way. Their limbs moved in almost unnatural motions as they slowly crawled towards us. I began to freak out. Jessica was crying even more now, and so was Sarah. We were all terrified. When the figures were about 10 feet away, I dared to look over at them. They had huddled together again, not looking at us, just sitting there. We didn't know what to do. We were paralyzed with fear. Sarah whispered in a crying voice,
"Who are they? Are they going to hurt us? I'm so scared."
I tried to calm her down, but I was crying myself. Suddenly, one of them turned its head to stare directly at me. Its eyes were dark and unblinking. I glanced at Jessica and Sarah, who were now both crying and shaking with fear. Their faces were pale, and their eyes reflected the same terror I felt. We huddled together, tears streaming down our faces, trying to find comfort in each other's presence. We didn't know what to do in the situation, and none of us dared to make a sound. Suddenly, one of the figures stood up. It started slowly walking towards us. We huddled together even closer. And just as it was about to reach us, the red light in the basement went out. Everything was dark. We were left in a state of paralyzing fear, unable to move or speak. I thought to myself that at any moment the unknown people could attack us, which filled my body with adrenaline. I was shaking with fear. So were Sarah and Jessica. We huddled our head together, preparing for the worst to happen. But it was just silence. Suddenly the lights came back on and the figures were gone. We looked around, but the basement was suddenly empty. The space where they had been was now just a dark corner. Panic surged through me. I grabbed Jessica and Sarah, my voice trembling as I said, "We need to get out of here, now!" in a panic voice. We stumbled towards the janitor's closet we had passed earlier. The closet door was heavy and difficult to open, but we managed to lock it behind us. Inside the small room, it felt like a fragile bubble of safety amidst the horror we had just experienced. We huddled together, our breaths coming in quick, anxious bursts as we tried to calm down. Minutes felt like hours. The silence in the closet was almost as frightening as the chaos we had just escaped. Then, we heard it. A faint, persistent knocking on the closet door. A female voice came from the other side of the door, calm but unsettling.
Why are you crying? We just want to be friends.
Her voice was oddly warm and soothing. The knocking continued. Fear gripped us. We clung to each other and started crying again. The voice was soon followed by a loud, angry shout that shocked us all even more. "Let us in right now or you will regret it," the voice demanded. It was filled with raw frustration. The noise was overwhelming and the anger in the voice was terrifying. We huddled on the floor, hugging each other tightly as we tried to comfort one another. The pounding on the door stopped suddenly, leaving us in a heavy silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. We remained huddled in our corner, with the weight of our fear pressing down on us. Time seemed to stand still. Each second felt like an eternity. After a while, we heard a key turning in the lock. The sound was both a relief and a new source of anxiety. We braced ourselves for whoever was on the other side of the door. The door creaked open slowly, and we squinted as light spilled into the closet. To our great relief, it was the janitor. He looked confused and concerned as he saw us with tears streaming down our faces. "What are you doing down here? The lockdown ended almost 2 hours ago," he said, clearly puzzled. We rushed out of the janitor's closet. Our hearts were still racing. He took us upstairs where we found Mr. Reynolds and the other students. Our parents were called, and they arrived to pick us up. Their faces were full of worry and relief. We never found out why the lockdown happened or what we had encountered in the basement. The experience left a lasting mark on us. My friends and I avoided the basement from that day forward, haunted by the memory of the crawling figures, their unsettling stares, and the terror we felt in the dark. It was a typical Wednesday afternoon at Ridgeway High when the lockdown alarm sounded, catching everyone off guard. I was in the basement retrieving some art supplies from the storage room when the announcement blared through the PA system. "Lockdown immediately. This is not a drill." Panic surged as I realized I was alone in the basement. I quickly searched for a place to hide and decided to squeeze into one of the old, dusty lockers that lined the walls. The locker was cramped and dark with only a faint sliver of light coming through the small ventilation holes. As I crouched inside, the initial noise of the lockdown, distant voices and hurried footsteps, started to fade into an oppressive silence. The darkness in the locker was almost suffocating, and I tried to steady my breathing. Suddenly, I heard a low, eerie laugh coming from somewhere outside the locker. It was a creepy, hollow sound that sent chills down my spine. I held my breath, straining to hear more. The sound of footsteps soon followed, growing louder and more deliberate. They were getting closer, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps stopped right outside the locker I was hiding in. My mind raced with fear as I heard the sound of someone shuffling and muttering to themselves. "I know you're in there. I can hear you breathing," a gruff, distorted voice said. My heart nearly stopped. The voice was close. Too close. I could hear the faint scrape of something against the locker door as if the person was trying to get in. The air inside the locker felt thick and stifling, and I had to fight the urge to scream. Just as the footsteps seemed to be right outside my locker, I heard a sudden crash and the sound of someone rushing down the stairs. The intruder's footsteps hurried away, and the basement was filled with the sound of a door slamming open. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move. After what felt like an eternity, I slowly peeked out of the locker and saw the dim red light of the basement staircase. Standing there was my friend Josh, looking equally terrified. He had apparently entered the basement just as the lockdown was lifted. I scrambled out of the locker and grabbed Josh, urgently telling him to run. We raced up the stairs. Behind us, we could hear the sound of footsteps chasing us, growing closer with each step. We pushed ourselves to run faster and faster. When we burst out of the building into the open air, we finally felt a sense of relief. We didn't stop running until we were far away from the school. After a while, the lockdown was lifted, and the school announced that there had been a false alarm due to a malfunction in the security system. The authorities didn't believe us when we told them about what happened in the basement. They just said we had a wild imagination and shrugged it off. But I know what I saw. It all started right after lunch. We were in the middle of cleaning up in art class when the lockdown alarm went off. The principal's voice came over the intercom, telling everyone to get into the nearest classroom and lock the doors. At first, we thought it was just another drill, but the tone in his voice made it clear this wasn't a practice run. Our teacher, Mr. Thompson, told us to grab our stuff and move quickly. The nearest room was this old, unused classroom down the hall. It had been closed off for a while, and honestly, none of us had ever been inside. It was creepy. Dust everywhere, broken chairs stacked in the corner, and the smell. It was like the place had been shut for years. We didn't have much of a choice, though, so we all filed in and locked the door behind us. At first, we just sat there quietly, trying not to freak out. We could hear distant noises from other rooms, like people whispering and shuffling around, but the room we were in felt completely isolated. It was dim because the lights were really old and flickered a bit. As the minutes passed, we started to notice weird things. There were deep scratches on the walls, and the whole place just felt off, like something bad had happened there. Then, out of nowhere, the door creaked open just a little bit. We all turned and stared, waiting for someone to come in. But the hallway outside was empty. Mr. Thompson looked at us, confused, and slowly walked over to shut the door. We tried to brush it off, but I could tell from everyone's faces that we were all freaked out. A few minutes later, the door creaked open again, wider this time. That's when we heard it. Voices. They were faint at first, but you could tell they weren't friendly. It sounded like someone was arguing or shouting quietly, but it wasn't any teacher or student we recognized. Then we heard this weird dragging sound, like something heavy was being pulled across the floor. I felt my stomach drop. Whatever was going on out there, it wasn't good. Mr. Thompson was clearly on edge. He told us to stay put while he went to check what was happening. He walked over to the door, but just as he reached it, a hand shot through the gap and grabbed him by the collar. I swear, it happened so fast, none of us even had time to react. He was yanked out of the room and the door slammed shut behind him. We could hear him shouting for help, but his voice quickly faded down the hallway. We were all in shock. 1 second, Mr. Thompson was there, and the next he was gone. It was like something out of a horror movie, but it was real. Some of my classmates started crying, and a few of us huddled together in the middle of the room, too scared to move. We could hear footsteps outside getting closer and the door rattling like someone was trying to force their way in. We were all panicking at this point. Emily, one of the girls in my class, tried to block the door with a broken desk, but it didn't help. Whoever was on the other side kept banging on the door, harder and harder, like they were going to break it down any second. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Everything went silent. No more banging, no more voices, nothing. We just sat there in the dark, holding our breath, terrified to make a sound. It felt like time had frozen. Every little noise, someone shifting in their seat, the flickering of the light, sounded way too loud. We stayed like that for what felt like hours. No one dared move or even speak. Then finally, the intercom crackled to life, and the all clear was announced. We all kind of looked at each other, too stunned to believe it was over. Slowly, we got up and made our way to the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the knob. When we stepped out into the hallway, it was completely empty. No signs of the people we had heard, no sign of Mr. Thompson. It was like nothing had happened at all except for the damaged door and the broken desk we'd tried to use as a barricade. I remember thinking, this can't be real. Did we just imagine all that? But the fear we all felt wasn't something you could make up. We were all shaken and no one knew what to say. The school called our parents, and when they showed up, they were just as confused as we were. No one ever explained what really happened that day. They told us it was a false alarm, but there was no way it was just that. Mr. Thompson never came back, and the school didn't talk about him again. It was like they were trying to sweep it all under the rug. To this day, I still don't know who or what was out in that hallway, or what they wanted. But I'll never forget the fear I felt in that room, or the way Mr. Thompson just vanished right in front of us. Even now, whenever I think about that day, it sends chills down my spine.